All right, good evening, everybody. I didn't think I'd be doing a video tonight, but this is in response to JD Delay's video regarding his response to some video he saw regarding raising the age of consent to 24, 25. Now, I gotta say that is fucking stupid based on the society that we live in, and I think he may have misphrased a couple of sentences in his videos. He does talk fast. Um, I saw a lot of comments on that. I think he's confused. But the point he was trying to make was, okay, so I'm going to assume right now the age of consent is 18. I mean, I know in different states it's different, but I'm just going old school, saying 18. That's when you're an adult. But raising it to 24, 25, that's just going to throw everything out of whack. And let's face it, even if the older party, is underage, like what happens when both parties are underage? Who gets in trouble? It just throws everything out of whack, or do they just kind of sweep it under the rug? Make that make sense. Now, obviously, from a psychological standpoint, the human brain isn't done fully developing, until around the age of 25. I think so. It's like the frontal lobe, whatever. But we live in a society. When you're 18, you're an adult, and I'm gonna go old school. In fact, I saw one of the comments in his videos, which touched upon some other points. Okay, so you're 18, you can serve your country, but you can't get served in a bar. And that comment was like, when you're 18, you should be able to do all the adult things, obtain credit, meet other people who are also adults, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, drink, smoke, fuck, et cetera, all that shit, all the adult shit that makes you an adult. And with that comes all the responsibilities and the accountabilities of being an adult. Now, obviously, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that somebody who's 18 is going to be a whole lot more mature than somebody who's 17. The brain doesn't work that fast, but you get my point. We drew the line for everything else, with one age across the board. In all 50 states, you're 18, you can vote. When you're 18, like I said, you can obtain credit, purchase property, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the fact that different states have different ages of consent, that's just what throws everything out of whack. What are the fucking creeps going to do when, it's 18 in their state, but it's 16 somewhere else? They're just going to go to that state. And, he did have a valid point. If they suddenly did that, and I think what he was trying to get to in his video was, if he has a child, okay. I think the point he was trying to make was, if somebody who was 24 tried to meet his daughter, he said he'd catch a case, meaning, he'd go out and make sure the guy's gone. You know what I mean? But, raising age of consent of 25, that would just throw everything out of whack. And, I wish he posted a link to the video that he was describing, so I could go see that. But, I just think we need to go back to a time where, one age, everything, adult-wise, and that includes, voting, being able to drive, actually being able to drive. Maybe we'll leave that one as 16 and a half. I think that's what it is now, because that one's also been across the board as far as I can remember. I mean, I think in Maine you could get a 15, but it wasn't valid in other states. But for the sake of argument, we'll leave that one alone because driving is a privilege. Um, and if you drive, and you're in high school, yeah, you'll be under your parents' insurance plan anyway. So it's not like you're gonna have your own plan. You'll be under your parents more likely than not. But in fact, speaking of being under your parents, there's also that gray area, where when you're a young adult, you can stay on your parents' plan until the age of I think 26 now. And that's because many kids go off to college. But anyhow, back to the topic at hand. Raising age of consent to 24, 25, or whatever the initial woman was saying is just fucking stupid. This is going to throw everything out of whack. Especially since chances are right now, as I'm speaking to you, there's probably some guy who's 25 that has a 21-year-old girlfriend. And right now, said couple is probably doing the deed somewhere. Nobody gets in trouble. But if they did that, then the 25-year-old would get in trouble. So it would just throw everything out of fucking whack. Anyhow, just my 2 cents. I'll talk to you.